continue our study in the book of Judges of the story of Samson and Delilah. And Samson and his wives, Samson and his exploits, which include Delilah. But one of the things that we discussed before is that this story of Samson really represents a riddle of sorts. Samson is an enigmatic character in that he seems to be a lust-filled fool, but yet he's listed in the book of Hebrews among the Hall of Faith. And so there's a principle at work in his life that we're supposed to learn from. One of the things that struck me as I was studying this week is that the story of Samson and Delilah, or Samson and his wives really, is kind of a part two of the story of Adam and Eve. And we'll talk about how that's so as we proceed through this morning. And you'll see, I made a little chart. It's sort of a continuum from good to evil. And I think particularly in this story, we obviously know that God is at the top. He's the spiritual high. Satan is at the spiritual low. We see the nation of Israel representing idealized man, if you will, a man who is led by the Spirit of God. Now, we know that the Israelites weren't perfect, but the ideal Israelite, and certainly a Nazarite, if you will, is someone who is led by the Spirit of God. We see down here that the Philistines represent man influenced by the flesh, man who's controlled by Satan working through the flesh. And then we see Samson and not just Delilah, but his wife as well, kind of playing the role as Adam and Eve. Samson wanting to be, or striving to be, if you will, a real Israelite, a man who's led by the Spirit of God to the point that he takes the Nazarite vow, which we see he violates. We also see how Satan influences the Philistines. The Philistines influence Samson's wife and Delilah, that results in his ruin. And we see in the life of Samson kind of a replay, or perhaps an explanation of the life of the first Adam, but we also see at the end of Samson's life something of the second Adam. And so in a sense, despite the fact that Samson is something of a fool who's led by the flesh, at the very end he really does represent a type of Christ, if you think about it. And therefore he becomes a symbol, if you will, or a foreshadowing of the second Adam. But it's interesting, we talked last week, we read through chapter 14. And I don't know if you saw this as you read through, but there's a lot of signs about how Samson's life degrades. For example, you see in the beginning of chapter 14 it says, and Samson went down. There are several references to Samson went down. In fact, we see at the very end when he went down to visit Delilah, it says, where does Delilah live? She lives in a valley. So he's going down. He's spiritually declining as he goes through. And we see that several places. In chapter 14, verse 1, it says Samson went down. Chapter 14, verse 5, it says, and Samson went down. But we also see some other clues in here about Samson's character. And particularly his character flaws. In chapter 14, verse 2, he's gone down to Timnah and he's visited Philistine women, and he comes back and he says to his father, I saw a woman. And then he says, go get her for me because she looks good to me. Okay, so what do we see there? Samson, he's afflicted by the lust of the eyes. So what he's seeing is what is bringing him down. And we know that Samson starts out as a Nazarite, which involved three different things, right? What were the characteristics of the Nazarite vow?
Couldn't cut your hair.
No cutting the hair.
Couldn't drink.
No drinking wine. Really, actually, no touching grapes, even raisins. You're not supposed to be around grapes at all. And what else?
Touching the dead.
No touching of dead bodies. So we know that Samson starts out taking the Nazarite vow, and no doubt for a period of time he honored that. But we see as his life progresses that he violates those vows. Okay? So what is the first hint we get?
I have a question. Samson didn't really take the Nazarite vows, did he? Because he was dedicated from birth. So, do we have any record of him actually taking the vows for himself, or was this something that was kind of put on him?
Well, you raise a good question, but he acknowledges, for example, if you look in chapter 16, verse 17, when he's talking to Delilah and she's pleading with him, and he says, a razor has never come on my head, for I have been a Nazirite of God from my mother's womb. So it's something that certainly, as you say, it was thrust upon him, if you will. It was his mother who was instructed first, you'll be a Nazirite, and then also your son will be a Nazirite. So no doubt the mother instructed the son as to what it meant, okay? And so he knew he wasn't supposed to eat any grapes, he wasn't supposed to touch anything dead, and he wasn't supposed to cut his hair. But we can see as Samson is traveling down, as we're told, and he's afflicted by the lust of the eyes. Where's the first place he comes? Chapter 14, verse 5. It says he went down and he came as far as the vineyards. Okay, so there we get the first hint. When Samson is proceeding through the vineyards, that's the first violation of his vow. Why? Because he should not have been anywhere around the grapes. And then what happens next? Then, with the power of God, he kills a lion. So then the lion is dead, but he comes back and he scoops the honey out of the lion's carcass. So he has exposed himself to a dead body. Now, last week, Robert and I were talking about whether is it a violation of the Nazirite vow to touch a dead animal, or does it just apply to touching a dead person? Well, we're going to see as we read that he also touched dead persons too. So he would have violated that vow as well. And then we're going to see later on, what does he do? When he comes to his encounter with Delilah, he doesn't actually cut his hair, but he tells her where his strength comes, and his strength comes from being a Nazirite. And basically by that time he should have known that if he tells her about cutting the hair, what's going to happen? His hair is going to be cut. So in essence, what is he doing? He is giving up, he's giving away his vows. Not directly, but he's basically, he's jettisoned his vows. And when he does that, then what? Basically, his life is over with. So, last week we were discussing Samson's riddle, and the riddle that he propounded at the wedding feast. And there's some implication there that he might have been doing some drinking at the wedding feast as well. It doesn't say specifically. And by the way, I wanted to tell you that rather than study our lesson, yesterday Jackie and I decided we're going to go see the movie Samson. You know, there's a new movie out. So we went to see it. And,
he was big, wasn't he?
well, I will say, who played the title role? I was expecting it to be Pee Wee Herman. But it wasn't Pee Wee Herman. Some big,
Schwarzenegger, right?
strong Schwarzenegger looking guy. So
And Wonder
they got that
Woman,
totally wrong.
Wonder Woman was his mother,
Was it
Yeah,
really?
right.
Was it worth watching?
Lindsay Wagner.
No way for that.
When she went-
No way. In fact, I was keeping a list of all the things they got wrong.
Diana.
Yeah. So again, don't waste your time.
The
Isn't that a
Wonder
shame?
Woman was
Hmm?
Lindsay.
Isn't that a shame people will go there that
Linda.
are totally unfamiliar with the Bible and think
Yeah.
that's gospel?
There was now they didn't tear the story down that badly. I mean, there were parts of it. I mean, the theme of it was it had a wholesome theme to it, but it was not faithful to the Bible, which kind of offends me. That there's no reason why it couldn't be. They could make it that way. They just decided to go off in different directions for whatever reason.
Took artistic
Artistic license.
liberties.
Liberty
But
license, as they
it
say.
was interesting that parts of it they took from other parts of the Bible and interposed it on this. So it was kind of,
Yeah. And one positive thing is they carried through with the theme. Samson is introduced that he comes along, and his role is to begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. He didn't do it completely. He said Samson was to begin to make that deliverance. And then at the end of this movie, they said they kind of carried on that he began the deliverance, but it was finalized through King David, and they had David and
How
Goliath
many
there.
years was that, about a couple hundred years?
they said 400.
David, well, it probably wasn't 400, because David came along, he would have been doing his fighting at about 1050 BC, plus or minus, and this would have been probably 1200 BC,
The
1250
Philistines
BC.
were
Couple hundred.
firing their side for a long time.
Oh yeah, a couple hundred years for sure, yeah. Of course, last time we talked about Samson's riddle, and Samson's riddle is it's simple in its terms, but it carries very many different layers of meaning. In fact, Lon and I were just discussing that this morning. The riddle was, out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. And of course, we know that what Samson was talking about, the physical context, the historical context of that was what? He's walking through the vineyard and along comes the lion. Samson is strengthened by the power of God. He tears the lion to pieces. The lion's carcass is there. When he comes passing through there the second time, bees have come and built a hive in the carcass and made some honey. And so he scooped the honey out and he ate it. He would have violated his Nazirite vow, in my view, by touching the dead carcass. But he propounds the riddle. And we're going to talk about how the riddle was disclosed. But last time we talked about how, in that sense, the lion represented Satan coming to defeat him, and Samson's strength was the power of God defeating Satan. So out of the eater came something to eat. The eater was, in that context, was Satan, and out of the strong, that is the dead body, came something sweet. And in a spiritual sense, it really represents, at one level, the idea of that life does not become sweet until the flesh dies and it is inhabited by God's Holy Spirit. So the honey represents the sweetness of the indwelling of God's Holy Spirit. The one thing that was troubling Lot, and I think there's great value in another interpretation of that. Lon, why don't you expound on what we're talking about this morning?
I was telling Rick as I was on the plane, just thinking there, I was thinking of that riddle and how Rick was saying, you know, if we think of the lion as the devil trying to devour us, and then that, I said, could we not think of the lion as the Lion of Judah? And it's Christ went through his death. I don't know, you know, I was just thinking something like that, and then Rick was saying some stuff that made me think even more about it.
Yeah, and I like what Lon's saying here, because in the context of Samson representing the first Adam, yes, it is the defeat of Satan, but as the second Adam, yes, the lion being the Lion of Judah. So out of the eater, which is the flesh of Jesus himself, came something to eat. Out of the eater, okay? Out of the flesh came something to eat. Something to eat being what? Jesus said, the bread represents my body, take and eat. This is my body which is given for you. And then out of the strong, the strength of Christ was he came out of the law, but out of the law, which is harsh, came something sweet, which was only through him will his Holy Spirit be imparted to us. So we have those two levels of meeting, which are in some sense entirely different, but they do sort of represent the role of the first Adam and then the second Adam too. So again, many different levels of meaning, many spiritual truths revealed in the history of the children of Israel. Okay, so we know Samson propounded this riddle, and let's read on about how the riddle was disclosed. Let's see, who wants to start reading? Terry, would you start reading for us? In chapter 14, start at, why don't you start at verse 12? We'll just pick up from that. Chapter 14, verse 12.
Let me tell you a riddle, Samson said to them. If you can give me the answer within 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Tell us your riddle, they said. Let's hear it. He replied, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. For 3 days they could not give the answer. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't explained it to my father or mother, he replied, so why should I explain it to you? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the 7th day, he finally told her, because she continued to press him. She, in turn, explained the riddle to her people. Before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Samson said to them, If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of their belongings, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he went up to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to the friend who had attended him at his wedding.
What similarities do you see here in this little exchange, similarity to Adam and Eve? With Eve, obviously, or the Samson's wife playing the role of Eve, and Samson in the role of Adam.
Well, I don't know, there's some to it, but the village people, these herd people they were telling her, you know, what that they wouldn't, I don't know. I was thinking like, you know, Adam, I mean, the devil would tell that God lied to you. But they said, why did you do this to us? Was it to cheat us and rob us? But I don't think now that's a good comparison.
What do you think, anybody?
What I get out of it, she tricked him into telling his truth is just what Eve did too, you know.
Eve didn't trick him.
Huh?
Eve didn't trick him. He was right there with her.
He gave her an apple.
Well,
Enticed her into it.
it was an enticing, I think, you know, with Eve, and I think the same way here. There's, you know, Samson's wife is doing what she's pleading. Oh, you know, woe is me. You know, you got to tell him. You know, she's just on him and after him, and finally he gives up. What's wrong with Samson disclosing the riddle?
Well, it led him to killing those people to pay back the debt.
Yeah. But what about what was inherently wrong with him disclosing the meaning of the riddle?
He shouldn't have been in that situation
No, he shouldn't
altogether.
have. No, he shouldn't have. But again,
Hanging around with bad company.
I think the riddle represents a spiritual truth that was disclosed to Samson, and it was for Samson's benefit to see the spiritual meaning behind the riddle, and it really wasn't supposed to be given over to the Philistines just for a gain, right?
Right.
It's like don't cast your pearls before swine. If you know if God has revealed some spiritual truth about Himself to you, it is to be something treasured in your heart, and not to be again cast before the swine for them to you know make sport of it. So then what happens? Then out of his anger, Samson's strength comes up, and he goes down and he kills 30 men and he strips them of their garments. And in doing so, what does he do?
Commits murder and he breaks his vows.
And right, he commits murder, right, and he also breaks his Nazirite vow, because even if there might have been a little, you know, if he's gotten a little bit of leniency because he killed a lion, an animal, he has certainly killed 30 human beings here, and he's touched the dead bodies. So he has now violated 2 out of his 3 Nazirite vows.
Going back to Adam and Eve,
Mm-hmm.
was Adam there whenever the snake was in, and Eve discussing the apple?
I don't think so.
Yes, he was.
We're on dangerous ground, man.
Tell us why you think that.
Pete, I'm gonna give you the verse.
He comes along later, for sure.
Didn't even say it's the 10th and fruit.
I understood it. Adam and the snake started a conversation, and then after that.
Yeah, it says in the beginning of chapter 3, now the servant was more crafty than any beast of the field. And he said to the woman, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? And so the woman and the
Read verse 6.
and the serpent are talking. And it says, when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and that was the delight to the eyes, that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from the fruit and ate it. She also gave it to her husband, and he ate.
Who was with her.
Who was with her? I have it highlighted.
She also gave some to her
Husband
husband
with her,
who
yeah.
was with her.
Right.
And he ate it.
Right.
And if you look further back, God told Adam not to touch the fruit, eat the fruit, and he didn't tell Eve.
Mhm.
But it never said apple.
No. Well, again, there's no doubt that Adam was there at the time. He was with her when she gave him the fruit,
The
obviously.
key is he knew he wasn't supposed to eat it.
That's right, he knew, and there's no excuse there for him. In fact, the scripture is harsh on him, but it doesn't say that he was there during the conversation between Eve and the snake. So,
Who was with her? What does that mean?
he was with her when the fruit was given over. When she saw that the tree was good for food and that it was delight. So, I mean, not that it makes a whole lot of difference either way, but, and you can believe me any way you want to, but it says what it
Well, you
says.
know, the thing is who actually picked the fruit? To me, that's where the problem lies.
Right.
The one that picked the fruit, and
Blame the
then
one.
from there, they could, talk somebody.
You're onto something.
Whoever picked
Yes,
What matters is who ate
the fruit. I
it.
mean, you can get into it.
That's right.
Am I right or lie?
I can go with that, yeah, that's possible.
Okay, all the men on this side and all the women on that side.
I'm sitting that way.
Moving on.
Moving on. All right.
Fake news, fake
Um,
news.
But God told Adam about it before even was even, do you say born? Formed. God told Adam about that tree before even was even born.
Yeah, well, but.
Made,
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yes, dear.
created.
The point is that Adam was condemned more harshly than Eve was because God said to Adam, you knew better. And no matter what she might have said or done, you should not have eaten that fruit. Okay? And so, Adam can't say, the
She
woman
made
made me do it. She made me do it. That was a lame
Devil made you
excuse.
do it.
But again, the woman sinned too. And so there's a consequence to the woman's sin. There's a consequence to the man's sin. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short of the grace of God. So that's kind of where that leaves us.
That's the point.
That's the whole point. Okay. Now, who did what to whom and when? Okay. And who was there at the time or who wasn't?
Well, we all admit Eve sinned.
That's right. And Adam did too, and neither one was excusable.
So how do you said when what Samson did, how do you interpret the Adam-Eve thing here?
What I see here is that Adam should have stood firm. Adam, at this point in time, he has succumbed to the flesh. The woman, again, and I'm not condemning womanhood in general, but it's an allegory. The woman represents the flesh, and when femininity, easy for me to say, when femininity is used the wrong way, it draws man towards Satan. When femininity is used in the right way, it draws man towards God. And that's the whole idea here. And in this case, the femininity of Samson's wife was used in a negative way and pulled him away from God. And that's the same thing that happened with Adam and Eve. All right, her femininity could have supported him and moved him in the right direction, but it didn't. Again, this is not a condemnation of women because it's an allegory.
But you're still blaming
But
the
she gave
woman.
in to her fear, and instead of revealing that fear to her husband,
That's right.
so that it could have been handled in a different way, she gave in to her people.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So again, it's the idea. It's not man versus woman. It's flesh versus spirit. That's what the whole battle is about. The spiritual versus the fleshly. And both men and women fight the battle of flesh versus spirit the same way women fight the battle of flesh versus spirit. And they should be working together. Sometimes one is working one way, one is working the other way. But things work best when they're both pursuing the spirit and subjugating the flesh. All right. Any other comments or questions about that?
Again, who were you depending on, man and woman, not God? They
That's
were
right.
not depending, either one of them, on God.
All right. That's
That's
right.
right.
Okay. Chapter 15. Who's our next reader? Kim, you want to read for us?
Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, I am going to my wife's room, but her father would not let him go in. I was so sure you thoroughly hated her, he said. that I gave her to your friend. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead.
So,
Samson
yeah.
said to them,
Hold on right there. It's kind of interesting that the father is saying, hey, these women, they're kind of generic, they're fungible, one is as good as another. So, what's the big deal if I gave your wife away? That's right. So it's like, we're only using these women as bait anyway, so, one lure is as good as another. Okay, read on.
Samson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them. So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. Then he fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up all his shocks and standing grain, together with his vineyards and olive groves.
Pause right there. One of the visual things that we got from the movie the other day was kind of interesting. And when you think about Samson, it was quite a feat to catch 300 foxes.
Pee Wee Herman.
Let's
Right. But the way it was portrayed, that after he caught the foxes and he tied the torches, that he let them loose at night. And so the foxes are running through, and the Philistines are looking down from their towers into their fields, and it looks like spontaneous combustion. It just looks like their fields are being set on fire, and they can't tell what's going on. So, that's interesting if it would happen that way. But yeah. All right, read on. Monica, pick up verse 6.
Who did this? The Philistines demanded. Samson was the reply, because his father-in-law from Timnah gave Samson's wife to be married to his best man. So the Philistines went and got the woman and her father and burned them to death. Because you did this, Samson vowed, I won't rest until I take my revenge on you. So he attacked the Philistines and with great fury and killed many of them. Then he went to live in a cave in the rock of Edom. The Philistines retaliated by setting up camp in Judah and spreading out near the town of
Lehi.
Okay. The men of Judah asked the Philistines, why are you attacking us? The Philistines replied, we've come to capture Samson. We've come to pay him back for what he did to us. So 3,000 men of Judah went down to get Samson at the cave in the rock of Edom. They said to Samson, do you realize the Philistines rule over us? What are you doing to us? But Samson replied, I only did to them what they did to me.
Pause right there. That phrase in verse 11 could represent like one of the lowest spiritual points of Israel of all time. When they say, what do they see? They see the Philistines, who evidently have left them in peace for a while. They come up and they're starting to come. It looks like they're mounting an invasion force to come in. And so the men of Judah say, what's going on? They say, we're looking for Samson. And so they find Samson. What do they say to him? It says, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? Basically saying what? They are resigned to the fact that they are under the control of the Philistines, that they are basically under the control of Satan at this point in time. That they totally, in other words, they totally succumb to the power of the flesh. Satan working through the flesh.
Do you think the writer, because like I say, they say Jerusalem, they will always say they go up to Jerusalem. And here again, going down.
Yeah.
Do you think they used that word down basically as negative? Or that was below?
I don't know. I think the writer, whoever wrote the book of Judges, and we don't know for sure, a lot of people say it was Samuel, the prophet who wrote the book of Judges. But I suspect that he was inspired by the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit gave him the word, and I think he wrote the word down, not really ascribing anything to it. But I think the meaning is there. Like say, going up to Jerusalem, you ascend spiritually. This is the story of Samson's descent. And you can see just in the next verse, and it says, we have come down to bind you. So it's everybody's going down. All right, Kathy, you want to read?
I'll pass.
Pass. Kenny, verse 12.
They said to him, we've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. Samson said, swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves. Agreed, they answered. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone. The place was called Ramoth Lehi, because he was very thirsty. He cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. And Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En Hakkore, and is still there in Lehi. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines.
Okay, pause right there. So we know that the oppression had lasted for 40 years. It was the longest oppression by the Philistines. Samson judged for 20 years, and as we're going to see, he appears to be the last of those who are named as judges among Israel. But this is an account that we all remember about Samson, that he slew 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. When you think about that, what historical account do you recall that we studied earlier that would come to mind in this context? I thought about Numbers chapter 22, the jawbone of a donkey, and particularly Balaam's donkey. You see any connection there? What is the connection to Balaam's donkey? What was unique about Balaam's donkey?
Talk to
It spoke.
He was smarter than the.
Yeah.
Right. The speaking of Balaam's donkey, in other words, the jawbone of that particular donkey was announcing what? A truth.
Mm-hmm.
The truth that came, and it's something that happened as a result of what? God's intervention, God's power. And so I think, I don't know if that was the intended connection or not, but what we can see here is that certainly the power that Samson had to slay these Philistines, 1,000 Philistines, came from God and nowhere else.
So when this happened, that must have been when he became a judge of Israel, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, that's when they got behind him as third judge, I guess.
Is it just me, but does Samson sound a little spoiled or arrogant in a way?
Not just a little bit.
I mean, because he told his father what to do, now he's telling God, I'm going to have a drink of water.
He's rotten.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a temper for sure.
Well,
That reminded me of the Israelites in the wilderness crying out for water.
Yeah.
Must I now die of water and fall into the hands of the
There
uncircumcised?
are no graves in
well, let's stay on what Kathy's talking about. What is Samson's real? If you had to characterize Samson, what would you say about him?
Selfish.
Very selfish. He's focused on himself. This is what I want. Give me what I want. All right. Now he's supposed to be a man following after the flesh, right? He's supposed to be a Nazirite who's totally devoted to God, but we see he's continuing to decline. He's being declined. Why? Because we saw in the very beginning, because I saw a woman. She looks good to me. In other words, I want that which I see, that which appeals to me, that which I think is good. As opposed to, or in contrast to, what God wants me to do. So we see the conflict. That's the conflict that all human beings have, don't we? I mean, we are all inclined to say, look, I see something that looks good and I want it, We have a tendency to serve the flesh because we're fleshly creatures.
I was just thinking, when you made that comment about Goliath, even that, God gives us things to use a certain way, but we use them fleshly, they can be bad.
Yeah.
Right? Money could be a blessing or it could be a downfall for you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
That's right.
a lot of things God gives us, and He gave man or woman for a companion, but if you use, the other way and stuff, it can be bad.
Right. And I don't know if I've told you this story before, but the transformative power of godly femininity is awesome. And I first realized that, and I've told you the story before, I was an RA counselor. We had a bunch of 6 and 7-year-old boys. And we took them to a retirement home, St. James Place. Me and William Connor in there, and my son was among them. There's a bunch of guys, they was like herding grasshoppers. I mean, they were literally, we were taking them down the hallway to visit this elderly woman. And they were literally bouncing off the walls, pushing each other, rolling over and falling. And so we knocked on the door, the lady we were going to visit, and the door opens up, and there's a little old woman. She looked like she was 120 years old, and she looked as frail as a piece of china. And she says, "Oh, look at all of the fine young gentlemen." And just her presence transformed these barbarians into gentlemen. I'm not kidding you. Because look, I walked in there, we walked into her little house. It was not any bigger than this. And she had, she made ceramics. And she had these ceramic pieces on her walls and on the tables. I mean, everywhere you look, there's this breakable ceramic. And I'm thinking, oh, you know, if these boys do not kill this poor woman by knocking her over, they're at least gonna, you know, be like a literal bull in a china shop. And look, I'm not kidding. She treated them like little gentlemen, and little gentlemen they were. They sat there with their hands in their laps and they listened to her. They didn't break anything. They did not break her. In fact, at the end, she gave each one of them a little, like a little ceramic egg that she'd made. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they held them, and they were perfect little gentlemen. They walked out the door, and no sooner had she closed that door, they were throwing these eggs at each other, and all the eggs got broken, and there they were, you know, like herding grasshoppers again. But that was an example of, you know, godly feminism and how that will transform the barbarian into a civilized being, and that's, you know, that's the way it's supposed to work. That's what femininity is supposed to be, not the kind that Samson's wife had or Delilah had, which leads towards the flesh, but it was a very uplifting thing. It was powerful. It's something I've remembered for 30 years now.
In the story, though, we never see Samson choosing a woman that God chose, that God told him to.
Right.
He was always one that looked good to him.
Well, wasn't it said though that the parents did not know it was by God on 14?
Well, what we see here is that when Samson he's drawn by the lust of his eyes, we see in chapter 14 verse 4 says, "However, his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines." So God is using Samson and his weakness to accomplish his purpose. And we see that his purpose was ultimately a very good purpose. Although, you know, Samson was seemingly working against God the whole way. He was playing to his flesh, even though God was leading him in the right direction.
Well, he went to see her, and then the prostitute, and then Delilah.
Yeah.
So they're not really
No.
good choices. No,
No, but there was a
Jewish
purpose.
women.
There's a purpose in all of it, right? In every bit of it, there's a purpose. God had a
Exactly. When
purpose.
you never cut your hair and all that for years, you don't have a lot of choices. And look like Pee Wee Herman.
True, that's true. All right, chapter 16. Who's our next read? One? Read verses 1 through 3 for us, please, ma'am.
One day Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn we'll kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate together with the 2 posts and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron.
Pause right there. So we have this story about Samson's visit to a prostitute in Gaza. And how does it wind up? He's discovered, but Samson performs a mighty miracle. And what does he do? He literally picks up the gate of the city, the gate to Gaza, which is, you know, that was the gateway to hell, so to speak. And he picks it up and he takes it to Hebron. So what symbolism do you see in that? First, what was Hebron? Where was Hebron?
That was like the capital of the Philistines?
No, Hebron was a...
Oh, Hebron, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Gaza was the head of the Philistines,
Yeah,
right.
that's what I was saying.
Hebron is down in Judah, remember? And Hebron was King David's capital before he made Jerusalem, before David captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites. But what else was Hebron? If you look in Joshua chapter 20, verse 7, it is one of the cities of refuge. It's on the west side of the Jordan River, okay? So it's a city of refuge. So this huge gate, the gate to Gaza, is picked up by Samson and it's taken to Hebron. What does that symbolize?
Joshua what?
Joshua 20, verse 7. First, what does the gate to Gaza represent spiritually?
Gates of hell.
The gates of hell, really.
Where is Gaza on this map?
Here.
I see
Almost
here.
to the Mediterranean.
Gaza, that's where all those Philistines are living right now. It's in the southwest part of
Well,
Israel.
there's Hebron right there. So where is Gaza?
Gaza's
On the
probably
coast.
down here on the
Oh, it's
coast.
Gaza's
Probably
right
off
here.
our map.
The city of Gaza
It's
is
off
right
that
here.
map.
The Gaza Strip is right here.
Man, he hauled that thing along.
I was just
Wow,
wondering how far that
a long
was.
way.
Yeah,
That's a long
it's a
way.
pretty good long way. It's, let's see, from there to there is, wow, over 40 miles. Probably right at 40 miles back, I guess.
That's right.
Well, in the movie, they were huge gates.
I'm sure they were.
I'm sure they're pretty big gates. But it's the idea of hauling off those gates, taking those gates, which represented the entryway to hell for people, right? And they're taken to the city of refuge, which was a place of what? Safety. And so there, I think, you know, if you think about that, there's a great spiritual truth there. You know, Jesus talked about the gates of hell. Remember when Peter had his revelation that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God? He said, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood did not reveal this to you. Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and what? The gates of hell will not prevail against it." Jesus also talked about, he said, in Matthew chapter 7, around verse 13, he says, "Beware, the gate is wide that leads to the path of destruction, but narrow is the gate that leads to the right way." So he says, you know, basically, watch out for the wide gate. And this is in essence, Samson. He's beginning to take on his role as the second Adam, dealing with and destroying and taking away the gates of hell.
Do you think that his purpose was to show them that even their gates can't protect them from him, or can't hold him, or
That's
something like
right.
that?
It's like the second Adam, the gates of hell will not prevail against him. That's right. Nothing can
So I
hold
mean,
him.
I was wondering like when he took him, what his idea of taking him was, and that
Yeah.
was just basically show that your stronghold is not for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Because the gates was what's protected him, right?
That's right, that's right. And I think this is also a part of the destruction, the beginning of the destruction of the Philistines. You take down their gate, you take down some of their defenses too. So in a militaristic sense, it was significant. All right, verse 4. Jackie, you want to pick up there? Just read verse 4 for us first.
Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah.
I probably read the underscore valley because, again, how do you get to a valley? You don't go up to a valley, you go down. So he's descending again to his lowest point. All right, read on.
The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength, and how we can overcome him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh thongs that have not been dried, I will become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh thongs that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the rooms, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the thongs as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to the flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him up with them. Then with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah then said to Samson, "Until now you have been making a fool of me and lied to me."
Pause right there. Who's the fool here?
Either he's playing with her or he is fake. I'm telling you. Coincidence? I don't think so.
No, she's claiming that she's been made a fool of. I mean, Samson is purely the fool. He is deceived, 3 times. He reveals a secret, she does something to him, and there come the Philistines, right? Like,
And they're
like,
hidden in the room.
what's that?
And they're hidden in the room.
That's right.
You know?
3 times.
That's right. Read on.
What verse am I on? 13?
13.
Delilah then said to Samson, "Until now you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took 7 braids of his hair, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with the pin. Again she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength."
Pause right there. There's a lot of spiritual truth in what she says. Just how can you say I love you? And the idea is Delilah, who's working for the Philistines, who are working for Satan, who are trying to entice him away from the spirit and into the flesh. The idea is, how can you say that you love the flesh? Okay, and that's really what she's trying to get him to do, is to love the flesh more than the spirit. Because what is she ultimately tempting him to do?
Tell me.
Give himself away.
To totally renounce his Nazirite vows. That's really the underlying purpose here. And that's what Satan is always about doing with us, he's trying to undermine, he's trying to get each one of us to renounce the vows, the commitment that we've made to God. And it's interesting here how this happens to Samson piece by piece. First he ventures into the vineyard. Then he's tempted to touch the dead bodies, and now he's tempted, through the flesh to give up the final secret, to give up his final Nazirite vow. And he must know by this point in time that by giving up the secret, that is, don't cut your hair, that's the last remaining part of the vow that he's kept. He must know that by revealing this to her, what's going to happen? He's going to lose his hair. That's right. But the fool that he is, he goes on. All right, Lon, you want to pick up from there?
All right, we're going to read 16, but we're going to talk about that later. With such nagging, she called him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaven, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison.
All right, pause right there. We're just to the good part. Why was it necessary, or why does it happen that Samson at this point gets his eyes gouged out?
So he can't see the flesh, the women.
Well, that's right. That's part of it. He is led by the flesh. I saw a woman. She looks good to me. Okay, so he is. The lust of the eyes is certainly something that has been controlling him. But also, as even a broader allegory, we all know one of the principal themes of the book of Judges, which is what?
once
The
again.
Israelites did what was good in their own
In their own
eyes.
eyes. They were doing what was good in their own eyes. So allegorically, when he gets his eyes gouged out, what does that mean?
He can't see.
That's right, it's the consequence, it is a consequence of doing what is right in your own eyes that what? You're no longer able to see. That's right. So that part is taken away from it. Okay, Jackie called timeout on us, so next time we're going to finish up with Samson and talk about that.